Greetings tape aficionados. In this video I'm going to do a review, a teardown and a very brief recording tutorial on this model, the Fostex X30 multi-tracker. Let's start by analysing this according to my 5 key factors. The first of which is size and weight. This is approximately 34 by 23 centimeters in its footprint. It only weighs 2.3 kilograms. We can fit it into a bike pannier bag, a small rucksack. So it would be very easy to take this to a practice room on public transport. The second key factor is tape speed and noise reduction. As standard, this is set up to go at 4.8 centimeters per second, but in fact the motor that's in there will comfortably do the higher speed of 9.5 centimeters per second. You can see that I've actually got a switch mounted up here in order to do that. If you're interested in that, check out my Patreon. I cover a lot of speed mods and things like that there. We have switchable noise reduction on a 3-way switch here, meaning that we can have Dolby noise reduction off, Type B or Type C. So there's a lot of backwards compatibility with other Fostex multi-trackers that use the Dolby system. Our third factor is the number of inputs we can record at once and the number of tracks that we can record to at once. We only have 2 1/4-inch inputs here, but we do have a bus in here as well. That means although natively we can only plug in 2 dynamic microphones, let's say, we could connect a fully featured mixer with fans and power, any number of inputs, mic up a whole drum kit and then take the stereo out and put that into the bus in here and create a stereo blend on 2 tracks at a time. We can record 2 tracks at once, either track 1 or 3, and either track 2 or track 4. The fourth key factor is the provision for EQ and effects. We have a bus level high and low shelving EQ. Since the way recording works on this model is to record the output of the stereo bus, we can apply that high and low shelving EQ to input signals during tracking. We can also increase the low and high end at the mixing stage using this EQ. There isn't any kind of auxiliary bus or other convenient way to do parallel compression, send multiple tape tracks to the same reverb or something like that. However, since we do have the 4 individual tape outs, it's possible to run the output of the tape machine through effects and then bring it back in through either the inputs or the bus in. And the fifth factor is whether we have the individual tape outs. I've already said that we do. The other advantage of having those sorts of outputs is that it enables us to use a larger desk in order to do mix down and do things like capture 4 individual mono stems in a digital audio workstation or on a digital recorder. So I'm shooting this out of sequence, having already torn down and cleaned and refurbished the unit, and also spent nearly 2 hours trying to figure out how it works. I've got used to the idea that if you want a particular set of features from a multi-track cassette recorder, it's cheaper to buy a Fostex than a Tascam, but you're going to have to learn an awkward user interface, which doesn't feel much like any other mixer you've used before, including other Fostex multi-track cassette recorders, and the X30 is no exception to that. Most multi-track cassette recorders work with a dual function mixer section with per channel switches which decide whether each mixer channel is going to act on a signal that's coming from an input socket or coming back from the tape. Usually a second mini mixer or submix is provided so that the performers can hear a different mix from what is being sent to the tape player. Usually that's labelled tape cue, monitor mix or something like that. The X30 doesn't work like that. The 2 input sockets are always passing signal through the EQ, through the master fader, through the meters, and to the line out sockets here in the back. There is a 4-channel mixer, but that is connected exclusively to the playback amplifiers coming from tape. At no point is the signal coming from the input sockets ever going to pass through these pan controls and these gain controls. There are 2 separate switches that control where this tape output mixer joins the rest of the signal flow. This button here controls whether this is introduced at the master fader and fed into both the input record amplifiers for the tape player and the line out. And then this switch up here controls whether we hear this 4-track mixer in our headphones or not. As a way of doing things, that's not inherently worse than the normal way that you see in multi-track cassette recorders, and one positive thing is we do get an uncluttered surface as a result. The problem is, in my opinion at least, the system isn't well documented in the user manual. These gain controls give us a balance of how loud the 4 tracks that are committed to tape are as they enter either our headphone balance or the master fader. The pan controls control whether those tape tracks are heard on the left or right speaker of our headphones and or whether they appear on the left or right hand side of the stereo bus. Moving to look at this norm remix button, if that button is up in this norm, which I suppose is short for normal, that means that this mixer is not connected to the stereo bus, therefore we won't see its output on these meters, therefore changing the master fader won't do anything to the level of it. We can still hear what's coming out of there in our headphones by having this switch either in tape position, which means we only hear what's coming out of this tape mixer and not what's coming from these two inputs, or in this mix position, which means that we're hearing both what's coming out of this mixer and what's coming in on these inputs in our headphones. If we were to move this switch to line, what that means is we're only going to hear the output from these two input sockets through these faders and through these pan controls in our headphones. Moving back to the switch, if we push it down so it's in remix mode, that means the output of this is going to appear at the input to this EQ section so that we can add or remove high and low EQ. We will see it in the meters and we can change the level of it using the master fader. Anything that's coming out of that stereo bus is going to appear both at this line out and be recorded to tape. At a practical level, what that means is we can have a stereo balance without EQ of what we've already recorded to tape that we hear in our headphones as we're performing overdubs, which is completely separate from the level from the input sockets that we're sending to tape. However, when we're mixing an entire track, we can connect this mixer to the output bus so that we can monitor the levels visually using the meters and send them as a stereo pair to the line out for recording on a master recorder. We would also have this button in the down mode for bouncing, because that means, for instance, we could take 3 tracks and pan them to the right and record the right hand side of the output of the stereo bus to track 4. That way, let's say I had overhead, a snare drum and a kick drum that were placed on a drum kit, recorded separately to tracks 1, 2 and 3. I can set up a balance like that. I record a blend of them to track 4, meaning that I can erase over this material with, I don't know, a bass guitar, a guitar and a vocal. Imagining you were recording an indie band or something. So this button for overdubbing and for tracking in the first place, probably you're going to have it up. If you're mixing a song or if you're ping-pong recording, you're probably going to have that down. This switch here, if you're just listening on headphones, not through the line out, and you just want to hear what's on the tape, have it off to the left here so that if I had a microphone connected here, I wasn't going to hear any rumble or anything interrupting what I was hearing coming back from the tape. If I wanted to solo only what was coming in on these two inputs, then I would go over to here, and then even if the tape was playing back, that would cut out any of the sound coming from this tape through this mixer to my headphones. But a lot of the time, in situations like overdubbing, I'm going to want to hear both the signal that's coming in this area of the mixer and what's already on the tape. So I would have the headphone switch in this middle position. Notice that one of the limitations of this unit is we only have one headphone socket. When I think of other units that I've reviewed recently, things like Yamaha MT120, Fostex X26, a lot of these have a separate pair of RCA outputs connected to the monitor bus. So we have an output where we can listen to an effects return on its own, listen to just what's coming back from tape or just what's going in on the inputs or a combination thereof. All of that's funneled into a headphone socket. So let's talk through all of the features. I'll just start in the top left and go down to the right. So up here in the top left, we've got tape outs, they're RCA outputs. Below that we have the pan control, 1 per channel, and we've got gain to play back the 4 tracks that are on the tape. Remember that channels are mixer features and tracks are locations on tape. We have separate pan controls for these 2 inputs, and these pan controls are part of how the signal is directed to the tape. If we quickly fast forward over here to these record track switches, we can see that there is a left and a right switch. We have the option to record 2 tracks simultaneously, either track 1 or track 3, which should be directed through the left bus. So if we want to record a microphone from input number 1 to either track 1 or 3, then we need to pan that over to the left. If on the other hand we were going to record to either track 4 or track 2, we can't record to those tracks simultaneously, and we would pan our input to the right. Note that it's possible if we wanted to blend 2 microphones on a drum kit, for instance, an overhead and a kick drum, we could record both of those simultaneously by panning them right, and we could record those in mono. to track number 2. These fader looking controls control the amount of signal that is received from the mixer by the tape machine during the recording process, and we have 2 basic levels of signal input set by these buttons here. When they're depressed, it's expecting a mic level signal, so there's a higher level of gain. When it's up, then it's line level. So if I was going to record the output of my MPC, then I would probably have that switch up, whereas if I was going to record a dynamic microphone, I would have that pushed down, and then I would fine tune the amount of gain by raising or lowering the corresponding fader. The 2 input sockets here are in fact balanced. On a lot of multi-track cassette recorders, we have unbalanced inputs, and that means that if you were to use a balanced XLR to 1/4-inch jack cable to connect your microphone to the machine, you could have problems with buzzing, distortion and so on. Not a problem on this unit. Over to the right of these input faders, we've got high and low EQ. There's a pair of them, so during playback, that's going to apply to the left and the right bus. So I guess if you had a recording where a sound that was too bright was on the right-hand side of your image, you could pull it down there, but then there's something a bit lacking bass that was mostly panned to the left, and you could push that up. Although we don't have per channel EQ, because we're using the system where we're directing our input signals through the master fader as we record, we can apply high and low EQ as we're committing the recordings to the tape. So again, if I was panned left in order to record to track 1 and my sound was a little bit dull, I could push up the high end there. Or if I was recording a small child singing with no low EQ in their voice, and I could just pull that down as they were recording. We've got a dual LED meter here, and we have the master fader itself. This will have a cumulative effect on the level going to tape during recording. Like even if I turn my microphone all the way up on this fader, if I turn that all the way down, then this isn't going to record anything, it's going to get silence. Usually we're going to want to have that between 8 and 7. Typically these sort of double-lined areas around the 7 and 8 level on faders show an area where it's unity gain. Above that you'd be boosting, below it you'd be cutting the signal that's coming in. Down here there is a normal or remix button. There's a headphone switch over here. One of the things that's important about a multi-track recorder is that we keep the signal that's received by the tape player from the input separate from what the people recording hear. Perhaps we want to record with our own guitar sound quite quiet so we can hear the drums properly, but if we were to listen to the master fader, our guitar would sound very loud. So at that point we would set the switch so that we could hear a blend of things that suited our performance. We can see that there's a switch here. It's 3 positions. We've got Dolby noise reduction, and we can either have it off or we can have it in B mode or C mode. Dolby B and C are both common Dolby schemes that you will find used in Fostex multi-trackers. They're less aggressive and, in some people's opinion, including mine, slightly more natural sounding than the DBX noise reduction that is featured in Yamaha and Tascam. Contrary to what I've said in some other videos you might have watched, they are actually a 2-part scheme where the information is encoded and then decoded. So it's the sort of thing that you should have on during playback if you had it on during recording, and should have off during playback if you had it off during recording. The fact that both schemes are included in this is an attempt to have backwards compatibility. So if you've got demos from another machine, you're definitely not going to get any kind of weird brittleness or pumping or other unpleasantness when you try and play back those encoded recordings on this machine. There's a sync input here, which is just a bypassing the mixer input to track 4. We've got a bus in left and right, and that will introduce the signals directly here without any preamplification coming from this machine. That means if you had a pair of external preamplifiers or an external mixer, you could actually record more than 2 inputs at once. The line out, that's a stereo output. We would just attach that to powered monitors. If we're going to capture a stereo stem in a digital recorder or make a master recording to some other kind of medium, an analog medium, then we would plug into those 2 sockets there. The DC input is here, that's positive tip. I'm not sure what the circuit protection is going to be like in here, but there are some models if you put negative tip like you would use in a Tascam in there, it'll actually damage it. I'm more excited by this than I should be, but in this round corner here there's a little recessed power switch. There are 2 1/4-inch jack inputs down here on the bottom left. We've got 1 headphone socket and an input for a foot switch for punching in and out. We have a mechanical counter, so we can reset it. There's also a 0 stop button, so that when we rewind from, let's say, 33 to 0, then a solenoid is going to physically stop the mechanism. So I'll just demonstrate this 0 stop feature. Push it down to show it's active. We can see that the counter is at 40. When I rewind, it's going to hit 0, 0, 0. It's going to stop automatically. Like so. There's mechanical buttons for the cassette player. In order to explain what RSL/take in this box above the stop button does, I do need to plug in a foot switch. It so happens that the only foot switch I have here, you can see it's a piano sustain pedal. It is dual polarity. In most instances, I'm able to use that as a foot switch with multitrack cassette recorders, no problem. The issue with this one is that it's expecting a stereo foot switch, and this doesn't have a stereo output. It's only got a tip sleeve mono jack plug on the end of it. So if I plug this in and insert a tape, which is recordable, only with this punch in switch plugged in, you'll see that this rec track light is green and then it's off. And I press stop again, it's green, and then it's off. When it's green, this shows that we're in a rehearsal mode, so RSL is short for rehearsal. And the idea is that you can practice when you step on your foot switch in order to practice punching in on a mistake. So if I arm one of the tracks now, pause, if I hold down stop and press this switch, it's cycling between this rehearsal and this record mode, which they call take. I can't demonstrate this very well because it's not a stereo pedal, but the idea is if I had a stereo pedal, every time I pressed that, that would be going between green and amber. So you can get some sort of visual feedback about whether you're punching in the right place without actually doing anything to the recording on the tape. And then once you're ready, you would enter record mode, and if I had the stereo switch, this LED would be switching between a very dim and a very bright red, and that would give you the feedback about whether you were punched out or punched in. So apologies, I don't have the correct foot switch to demonstrate that better, but that's roughly how that feature works. There is a user pitch control. It's just tucked away inside here, inside the cavity, off to the side there. Right now I'm going to start to take the unit apart, so I will begin by taking all these knobs off the front. So let's note the colour and location of them. These vertical 1, 2, 3, 4 is for the pan control in grey. The horizontal 1, 2, 3, 4, also grey, is for the gain control for the monomix section. We've got horizontal plain blue knobs, both for the phone's control and also for these high-low EQs. And then for the input section, those knobs are in red. A is on the left, B is on the right. Vertical style for pan, horizontal style for the gain slider. And then this M labelled blue horizontal slider is for the master control. These are just going to lift off by hand, looks like. I think these 3 switches here will also come up by hand. Yep. So that's one for the phone switch and one for each of the record track switches. I'll go away and remove those, and when we come back, we'll take the screws out the back. I've removed the screws. I'm just using the most common size of Phillips head screwdriver that you would have lying around your house. I believe that technically most of these Fostex, Yamaha and Tascam units are actually using JIS, that is Japanese Industry Standard screws. They're a slightly different size, and by using a Phillips screwdriver in them, you're slightly at risk of stripping them. It's something to do with torque. But if you're only going to be doing this occasionally, unless you're faced with a very tight screw, it's probably okay to use Phillips. But anyway, there's one in this hole here, one here, one here, one here, one here. You may want to keep these in little plastic bags, and what I tend to do is take masking tape and put them on little baggies right where the screws came from, help myself stay organised. I've just propped it open with a rolled up bit of cardboard. Pretty typical practice for me. It seems that we can sort of let it fold over to the left. I'm just slotting the inside of this top case inside there so that'll stay up. I'm going to first remove this piece of shielding so that we can see a little bit better where the wires are connecting. The shielding is coming from the bottom board, going to a ring connector in the bottom here. The screw is also running through the shielding itself, so if I just remove that, we'll be able to get it out of the way. The screwdriver is magnetised, so I can lift that quite easily. This is the type of screw we most commonly see on the inside of these sorts of units. Same size of screw head. Thread is at an angle of, well, 30 degrees, and that would indicate to me that that's going into a plastic mounting post. Let's see if this is attached anywhere else. It isn't. These parts here were just folded in behind these input sockets. And that'll just be stopping any electrical interference from the mixer section getting down to the record playback section down here. We can already see, by the way, that this is a GEC transport. I've done a whole series of videos covering the disassembly of those. Right, let's disconnect the top and bottom half. Let me just change this angle a little bit. So there are 4 connectors here. They look quite robust, so I'm just going to pull the wires and pull them out. Yellow going into yellow, black going into black, red going into red. Longish cable coming down corner. I just moved that slightly, I'll point out where that came from. Just to the right of these largest capacitors here. Now sometimes what I would do is colour code the connectors and headers as I go along. Use a Sharpie and put coloured ink onto both the, this is called a connector, the socket into which it's going is called a header, but they are using different colours of plastic here, so between them being different colours and them having a different number of cables, that's not going to be necessary in this build, I don't think, because this one I'm about to pull out is also yellow, but it's got far more cables in it than this one, so there's no way you're going to get those mixed up. 2-pin one out the top right here. Little 2-pin yellow one. Now, this one's also white, but you see how it's a different size to the previous one, so I'm not going to get those mixed up. 2 down here between these pairs of input sockets. So, cable length, in fact, they've got different numbers of cables as well, so yeah, again, I don't need to do any labelling. We'll move on to taking this cassette player out in a minute, but let's comment a little bit at what we're looking at. This is the record playback board. I can tell that because there's things like relays here. These relays are going to be changing whether the dual function record playback head is transmitting information to the tape or removing information from the tape and putting it through the mixer on a channel by channel basis. Also, to see a lot of these variable coils, these aren't a feature of mixer circuits, but they are a feature of the recording circuits. And when you have a bunch of components on a little daughter board like that, they're almost certainly going to be the oscillators that create the AC bias that are critical to the process of recording. There are some familiar chips in here as well. These are 26A SD, that's the new Japan radio. And it's the 9-pin version. We see those op amps used for playback amplifier gain as early back as the Tascam 244. This is the 9-pin version because it's running off a single 9-volt rail, because it's got a DC power supply. If you had an internal transformer, you'd probably see the 8-pin version, which runs off a positive and negative rail. And here we've got the JRC 7080, and that's very typical op amp that's used for headphone output. Anyway, let's start to remove this. It looks like this pitch control board is going to need to come away, and that's got a smaller screw. So I'm going to use a smaller size of screwdriver. Equal tiny one. Lift it out the way. The transport is attached by 2 screws in between these buttons here, and there's one up at the top corner here. Back to the larger size of screwdriver. And we can see that that pair of screws I've removed is the same size as the one that was holding the shielding on here. Another one here with a washer. Of course, that's just to keep that corner a little bit flatter, is it? So yeah, that's going to lift out. Let's get the heads detached. Usually when we see cables with 3 inputs, that's going to go to the record head, and the erase head's only got 2. The 3 cables on the record head, only 2 of them carry signal, but because that's an audio line rather than an AC bias line, they're a little bit susceptible to interference, and so there's shielding there as well, which acts like an antenna and takes any of that nasty stuff and sends it to circuit ground so it doesn't pollute your signal. These tend to be a bit more fragile. Pry these open with flathead screwdriver just to save putting any strain onto the cables themselves. No point in you watching that whole process. I'll come back once I've done it. Those are removed now. Now we need to remove two headers here. These will be transmitting the pitch information and the power to the 4-pin motor. There's also going to be connections to leaf switches, you know, like so this one here that I'm pointing at now. Switches like that shut when we're in play mode, when we're in fast forward, when we're in rewind, and that interacts with the logic system. So if I just pull in these ones, a little bit stiff, but the cables are strong enough. And then we've got a voltage regulator. This is going to be taking the slightly wiggly 12 volts from the power supply and dropping that down to a smooth 9 volts that can be used by all the operational amplifiers in the system. The way that they've dealt with the fact that it's going to get a bit hot and needs to dissipate heat is to mount it to the side of the transport here. So notice that the side with these 3 little shark gills or whatever, that's pointing upwards for when you reattach it. There we go, that's the transport completely removed. There's the Autostop solenoid that I mentioned earlier. You can see some more of these switches. That's quite unusual actually, that we've got a switch back here. And there's a switch that we don't normally see there. Other than that, it is identical to anything you've seen covered in my series of videos about the GEC transport. Let's say we needed to change some components, look for cracks in the board or something. Where are we going to get access to that? Well, it looks like we've got 1, 2, 3 screws. I'll remove those and see if there's any more than that. Screws like that. Yeah, okay, so tip it forward so these sockets will go through these holes. That shielding does come out completely. Nice thing about this board I'm noticing is that it is labelled nicely on both sides. So this is the race current here, reproduction EQ is this trim pot, and it even gives you all that information on the back, part identifier numbers and everything labelled out. So that would be a pleasure to work on even if you didn't have the schematic. Now we're going to remove this mixer board from this plastic case so we can clean the faders and pots and switches on this side. This one, you'll notice, has a little flat washer on it. I suppose that's to help this bit of shielding make contact with this area here. Seems like we've got 2 in a row here. One up in this corner, and that's it. This meter here is of this type that's rather susceptible to problems with the little tiny micro LEDs in here going out. I hope that they will work on this one. If they don't, then there's ones that aren't quite the right size height wise, but they're about the right width that you can get off AliExpress for a few quid, and you could probably just wire them in here. Cross that bridge if I come to it. I cover a lot of stuff like that. Little mods, little tweaks that don't end up in the main teardown and repair videos up on Patreon. It's very cheap to join. There's a couple of switch caps I can take off here and clean while I'm cleaning the other plastics. Refer to my cleaning multi-trackers playlist for a detailed version of how to clean this, but basically compressed air, contact cleaner. Once that's all evaporated, I run a little bit of this stuff, deoxit fader lube. It's designed for faders that have metal and plastic parts, but that equally applies to switches and the style of pots that we see in these sorts of units. So I actually use it with success for everything. This bit of shielding is going to lift out, and this sort of felt dust cover sits on top. Imagining we needed to do something with the door here, we can remove these 2 screws. Little springs are identical. When you pick those back in, the end with the hole goes here, and then the bit that goes downwards with these lips goes around the pin. Turn this through an angle. A certain amount of wiggling involved to get that out. That would give you really good access to clean the plastics. I'll give all of that a usual once over and we'll put it back together and have a go at using it. The way I'm going to demonstrate is just by singing the 3 tones of a major triad. I'm not a good singer, so brace yourself. Onto tracks 1, 2 and 3, and then I'm going to bounce them to track 4, and then that way I'm going to demonstrate most of the basic recording facilities here. And also the way that this norm remix switch and this headphone switch affects what we're hearing. So these RCA cables are connected to powered monitors in my room. I'll plug them into line out now. I've also got these headphones. I'll plug them in, and at points I'll turn them up so that you can just about hear what's coming out of them. For demonstration purposes, I'm using this T-Bone microphone, cheap copy of an SM57. The 2 input sockets here are in fact balanced, but I'm going to use the sort of multi-track cassette recorder safe cable that I use on other models. This is a professionally manufactured cable going from the XLR female socket to the male 1/4" jack, but we've only got a TS that is mono, that is unbalanced connection, but it'll work. For the purposes of the demonstration, I could equally be plugged into input number 2, but I'm going to plug into input number 1 here. Dynamic microphone like this will be producing a microphone level signal. So I want to have a bit more gain coming on that. So I'm going to have this button down. And then when I put the fader up to the center, because the pan's in the middle, we can see the signal from my voice hitting both of these meters. If I pan over to the right, it's only going to the right hand side of the stereo bus. If I pan to the left, it's only going to the left hand side of the stereo bus. So you can see that these pan controls are kind of like switches to send our signal to either the left or the right bus, since that's where our record switches are picking up the signal. Now if I turn on my speakers, you can probably hear a doubling of my voice. If I really turn that up, you can hear my voice distorting. So that's too much. Just flashing occasionally in the red is what I want. This demonstrates that the sound from this input section is always going to be connected to these line out sockets. Now, if I just turn off the speakers in the room again, if I turn up the headphones, hopefully you can hear this distorted sound is coming out of these headphones. That's in the line mode. So at the moment, the only signal that's going through the headphones is the input from this. If I move that switch to mix, that means whatever is coming from this area and this area will be heard simultaneously. I'm not playing back a tape at the moment, so we still only hear the microphone. But if I move over to tape, what that means is only this mixer area, which is connected to the tape player, will be coming through the headphones, and therefore nothing's coming through the headphones. You're only hearing my voice in the room, though you can still see the signal that's coming from the microphone contributing to what is happening on the meters here. You can see where that signal is going changes depending how I set the pan switch, okay? So I'll pull that back down to a sensible level again. As I record the first take, there's no harm in me being able to hear this microphone signal through the speaker, so I'll turn them on again, and maybe you can hear my sound reinforced by the speakers now. Here we go, first take. I'm panned left. I have the left record arm switch set to track 1, so anything coming from this left hand side of the stereo bus is going to be recorded to track 1 of the tape. Do. Stop. Turn on zero stop. Rewind. It'll stop automatically. Now I'm going to record me, the third of that triad, to track 2. So what I've done is taken same input, panned it right, so it's now appearing on the right hand side of the stereo bus. I've disarmed track 1 so I don't erase over what I just recorded, and I'm recording instead to track 2. If I were to listen, not with my headphones but with the speakers in the room here, by pushing down this remix button here, which would connect the output of this mixer to the stereo out, meaning that I could hear it from the line out. If I did this, panned track number 1 as well as turning up, I'd actually be sending that signal through here, and it would be combining with the sound of my voice, and I would make a bounce of track 1 to track 2. So as soon as we're in the overdubbing mode, we don't actually want to be using speakers in the room. So I'm going to turn them off and leave this mixer disconnected from the master fader. Now because the headphones are turned up, it should be that we can hear the recording I just made coming out of the headphones anyway. You hear that? And just to be absolutely clear that any audio you're hearing back from the tape at this point isn't coming from the speakers, I'll just disconnect these line out sockets from the back here as well. If you can just about see that on the top of the screen. Okay, I press play. That sound's just coming from the headphones. That's in tape mode. Put it into this mix mode, meaning that we can hear both what's coming from this red labelled section and this grey labelled section at the same time. We'll still be able to hear what's on the tape. There we go. But if I move to line, it cuts out, because at that point what's audible through here is only what's coming out of the red labelled input section. So by altering this control, this control and this control, I can get a balance between my voice in the overdub and the previous material that I'm comfortable with. Now let's go for a take. Me. Now we can monitor that back. Again, I'm only listening to this through the headphones. It's probably going to be quiet, but hopefully you can hear that sound coming from the headphone. Set those back to where they were. I'm going to spread these signals out in my headphones as I'm listening a little bit. So I'm going to disarm track 2, arm track 3. Track 3 is accepting its signal from the left hand side of the stereo bus, so that means I need to pan this input to the left. Let's just go for it. So now this time, so you can hear it properly, what I'll do is reconnect the speakers, pull down this input section, set this switch to remix, which means that the output of this mixer is going to come through the speakers. Notice as well, if I press this button, the sound cuts out from the speakers. It would still be audible in the headphones, providing I was either in this position or this position, but it cuts out from there when I press that button, okay? So let's say I want to overdub even more vocal tones, you know, start putting in the 7th and the 2nd and the 4th and going like really dominant chord with it. What I could do then is bounce all 3 of these tracks through the right hand bus to track 4. So disarm everything except track 4. It's accepting its input from the right hand side of the stereo bus. With this norm remix button down, that means the output of this grey mixer is connected. So if I like that balance, the position of the fader and level of the tape track that we're bouncing to doesn't matter. Now when I hit record and play, I'm making a blend of tracks 1, 2, 3 and track 4. Stop. Rewind. Now, if I turn down all of those tracks, turn up track 4, we're going to hear the blend that we just bounced. So I can start panning that entire blend. And that would mean I could overwrite the material in tracks 1, 2, 3 with percussion, maybe a tuba solo, who knows. And let's say I thought that was all loads of shit and I just want to erase over it. I can do that 2 tracks at a time. So pull down the master fader, pull down the inputs. First we'll record over tracks 1 and 2. And I'll stop at 4 just to show you that this is how erase works. I'm going to record over tracks 3 and 4. If I go back to 0 now, press this button down again so this grey mixer is going to the tape out, and turn all of these up, pan them in the centre. And it should be that we hear nothing until 4 and then some of the sound cuts back in, because that's where I stopped erasing. So here we are, silence at 4, suddenly the sound comes back in. Here's the scenario I mentioned where we run signal from the tape out through an effect and back out through the input. So you can see I've got no input coming from this grey Monmix section. When I press stop, you can hear the reverb dying away, whereas when it's dry, it sounds like that. Mix this back up. So you could do that mix down. You can also do it as part of the bouncing ping-pong recording process. I suppose the final thing for me to demonstrate is this bus input. Now you could connect anything to that. A really expensive mixer, preamp, a groove box, whatever. For demonstration purposes, I've just got the headphone out of my iPad going in there, so we're rather incestuously going to watch one of my videos.
Really good news in terms of price.
Don't listen to him, he's an idiot. So I've just adjusted the output.
The extra mixer channels, the effects returns, dual speed, the noise reduction,
from my device, whatever it is, and you see at maximum volume it's getting quite loud on the meter there. Now if that was a backing track and I wanted to record my own playing over it, then I could record that simultaneously with whatever's coming from this red section. So in this way, let's say you had an 8-channel external mixer, you could record a combination of 10 inputs. That is the 8 that's coming from your mixer via the bus in and the 2 from these 2 input sockets here onto either one mono channel or stereo pair. I hope that's enough to get you going with this unit. Overall, I do like it. The usability is a little bit questionable compared to Tascam stuff, but that goes for a lot of Fostex stuff, if I'm honest. You know, it's more bang for the buck with a little bit less usability. So it's a bit like the comparison between Apple, Mac and PC. You'll get more computing power for your money with a PC, but if you want a usable experience, then probably the Apple's going to be better. That's the generalization I'd make about Fostex and Tascam. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to see more content like this, please like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff helps me. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you again soon.